The city was cloaked in darkness, save for the sporadic flickers of streetlights that dotted its labyrinthine streets. Vincent Blackwood, an infamous contract killer known for his meticulousness and cold-blooded efficiency, navigated these streets with ease. To him, the city's underbelly was a second home. Vincent's life had been a series of calculated decisions, leading him down a path where morality had no place. He thrived on the thrill of the hunt, the precision of the kill. But recently, something had changed. Shadows seemed to linger longer, whispers danced on the edge of his hearing, and he felt a presence he couldn't shake. One night, after a particularly gruesome job, Vincent returned to his secluded apartment on the outskirts of the city. He stood before the bathroom mirror, scrubbing the blood from his hands. As the water turned crimson and spiraled down the drain, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the mirror, behind his reflection, stood a figure, a gaunt, hollow-eyed specter staring back at him. Vincent spun around, but the bathroom was empty. He turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone, but the haunting image had burned itself into his mind. Days turned into weeks, and the apparitions grew more frequent. The ghostly figure began appearing not just in mirrors, but in dark corners, in the periphery of Vincent's vision, and even in his dreams. The relentless presence gnawed at his sanity. Desperate for answers, Vincent sought the help of a reclusive medium, Madame Ilara, known for her connections to the spirit world. Her candlelit parlor was filled with the scent of incense and the soft hum of chanted prayers. Madame Ilara listened intently as Vincent recounted his encounters. Her eyes, deep with otherworldly knowledge, seemed to pierce through his very soul. "This spirit," she said, "is tethered to you by a grave injustice. To find peace, you must uncover the truth behind its unrest." Vincent's mind raced. He had taken countless lives. Any one of them could harbor a vengeful spirit. But something in the medium's gaze told him this was different. This was personal. Haunted by the medium's words, Vincent delved into his past, combing through old files and records of his assignments. It was during this search that he stumbled upon a name that sent a shiver down his spine: Nathaniel Carter. Nathaniel had been one of Vincent's earliest targets, a seemingly straightforward job. But as Vincent read through the details, long-buried memories surfaced. Nathaniel had been a journalist, digging into the city's corruption, a man with a family, a future, and a fierce determination to unveil the truth. Vincent remembered the night he killed Nathaniel. The man had fought back, begging for his life, pleading for mercy not for himself, but for his wife and unborn child. Vincent had silenced him with a bullet, coldly efficient as always. But Nathaniel's final words, a curse spat through bloodied lips, now echoed in Vincent's ears. "You will never find peace." Determined to put an end to his torment, Vincent tracked down Nathaniel's widow, Emily. She lived in a modest house on the outskirts of the city, a place brimming with sorrow and memories. Emily was initially terrified when Vincent appeared at her door, but he managed to convince her that he sought redemption. Reluctantly, she allowed him in. The house was filled with photographs of Nathaniel, a shrine to a man whose life had been unjustly stolen. Emily spoke of Nathaniel's passion, his unwavering quest for justice, and the void his death had left. As Vincent listened, the weight of his actions pressed down on him like never before. He realized that he had not just ended a life, he had shattered countless others. The ghostly figure of Nathaniel appeared once more, this time in the corner of the room. But now, instead of fear, Vincent felt a deep sense of remorse. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, tears streaming down his face. Madame Alara had given Vincent one last piece of advice: to perform a ritual that could sever the bond between the living and the dead. It required the killer to seek forgiveness from the victim's kin and to atone for his sins in a place of significance. Emily guided Vincent to an old chapel, a place where Nathaniel had often found solace. They stood before the altar, the air thick with tension. Vincent lit a candle and began to speak, his voice trembling with emotion. "I took your life, Nathaniel, and with it, the lives of those who loved you. I see now the pain I've caused, and I seek your forgiveness. Please release me from this torment." As the candle's flame flickered, the ghostly figure of Nathaniel appeared before them, more tangible than ever. Emily gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Nathaniel's spirit looked at Vincent, his expression a mix of sorrow and understanding. "You cannot undo what has been done," Nathaniel's voice echoed through the chapel, "but your remorse is real. I release you from your torment, Vincent. Find a way to do good with the life you still have." With those words, Nathaniel's spirit began to dissipate, a peaceful smile crossing his spectral face. The oppressive weight that had burdened Vincent lifted, replaced by a profound sense of relief. Vincent knew his journey to redemption was far from over, but he had taken the first step. He dedicated his skills to a new purpose: protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, exposing the very corruption he had once been a part of. The city's underbelly still whispered his name, but now it spoke of a man seeking atonement, a shadow working for the light. Thank you for watching this chilling tale of the lost soul of the Target Killer. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with more spine-tingling stories. What do you think about Vincent's path to redemption? Could a killer truly find peace? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, the line between the living and the dead is thinner than you think. Until next time, stay safe, stay scared, and keep watching True Terror Files.
Dr. Mike Taylor was an experienced pathologist at St. Andrew's Hospital. With over 20 years in the field, he had seen everything from gruesome murders to tragic accidents. Nothing surprised him anymore. He had learned to detach himself from the horrors he encountered daily. However, this detachment came at a cost. His wife had left him a year ago, citing his emotional unavailability and obsession with work. Since then, Mike had thrown himself even more into his work, spending countless nights in the cold, sterile environment of the autopsy room. It was a stormy night in late October when Mike received the call. He was about to leave the hospital after a long day when his phone rang. The voice on the other end was that of Detective Laura Henderson, someone he had worked with numerous times. She sounded tense, her voice cutting through the static noise of the storm. "Mike, we've got a case. It's urgent. We need you to perform an autopsy immediately," she said. Mike sighed, grabbing his coat. "Can't it wait until morning? I was just about to head home." "Believe me, I wouldn't call you if it wasn't important. The body was found in an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. There are unusual circumstances. Please, Mike, we need you." Her tone left no room for argument. Mike agreed and headed to the morgue. The hospital was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were the last person on Earth. As he walked through the dimly lit corridors, he couldn't shake off a sense of foreboding. When he arrived at the morgue, the body was already there, covered with a white sheet. He glanced at the police report left on the table. The deceased was a young woman, identified only as Jane Doe. She had been found in a dilapidated house, her body showing no obvious signs of trauma. The circumstances of her death were a mystery. Mike prepared himself mentally for the task ahead. He had done countless autopsies, but something about this one felt different. He pushed the feeling aside and began his work. Mike started the autopsy in the usual manner, making the Y incision and examining the internal organs. Everything seemed normal until he reached the heart. It was blackened and shriveled, unlike anything he had ever seen. He was puzzled but decided to take a sample for further analysis. As he continued, a sense of unease grew within him. The lights flickered, and he looked up, momentarily distracted. Shrugging it off as a power surge due to the storm outside, he returned to the body. But something was different. The eyes. They were open, staring directly at him. He was certain they had been closed when he started. A shiver ran down his spine, but he dismissed it as his mind playing tricks on him. He closed the eyes and continued his work. However, the feeling of being watched persisted. The phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was the hospital administrator. "Dr. Taylor, we've received new information. That body you're working on belonged to a cult member. Be careful. Some strange things have been reported about them." Mike's heart raced. He glanced at the body, now lying still once more. Cults and rituals were not something he believed in, but the uneasy feeling was hard to ignore. He decided to finish quickly and send the samples to the lab. As he was stitching the body, he heard a whisper. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the sound of the rain outside. He stopped, holding his breath, listening intently. There it was again, a soft, eerie whisper coming from the body. Panic set in. Mike stepped back, his eyes fixed on the corpse. The whispering grew louder, turning into a low, menacing chant. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. In the brief flashes of light, Mike saw the body twitching, the mouth moving as if trying to speak. Desperate to get out, he turned towards the door, but it slammed shut on its own. He was trapped. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and something else, something otherworldly. The whispers were now a cacophony, filling the room with an unbearable noise. Mike backed into a corner, his eyes wide with terror. The body sat up, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It stared at him, a sinister smile spreading across its face. "You shouldn't have disturbed me," it said in a voice that was both Jane Doe's and something far more ancient and evil. The last thing Mike remembered was the body lunging at him, and then everything went black. When he awoke, he was in a hospital bed, surrounded by concerned colleagues. They told him he had been found unconscious in the morgue, the body of Jane Doe gone without a trace. The autopsy room was in disarray, as if a violent struggle had taken place. Mike never spoke of what happened that night. He resigned from his position shortly after, unable to shake the terror of that encounter. The autopsy room was sealed off, the incident covered up by the hospital administration. But Mike knew the truth, and it haunted him for the rest of his life. Some say that on stormy nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers of Jane Doe echoing through the halls of St. Andrew's Hospital, a reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond our understanding. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think happened to Dr. Mike? Let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned for part 2. And remember, stay safe out there. You never know what's lurking in the shadows. Months passed, and the incident at the autopsy room faded into a whispered legend among the hospital staff. Detective Laura Henderson, however, couldn't let it go. She had seen the fear in Mike's eyes, heard the tremor in his voice when he spoke about that night. Determined to find out what had truly happened, she began her own investigation. Laura visited the abandoned house where Jane Doe had been found. The place was a crumbling wreck, reeking of mildew and decay. She combed through the rooms, searching for any clues that might explain the mysterious death. In one of the rooms, she found strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that sent a chill down her spine. She took photos and sent them to a friend who specialized in occult studies. His response was immediate and alarming. The symbols were part of an ancient ritual meant to bind and control malevolent spirits. According to him, the ritual had likely backfired, resulting in Jane Doe's death and possibly unleashing something far worse. Determined to learn more, Laura dug into the history of the house and its former occupants. she discovered that it had once been the home of a secretive cult known as the Children of the Black Sun. The cult was notorious for its dark rituals and had been disbanded after a series of mysterious disappearances. Laura's investigation led her to an old, forgotten archive in the basement of the town library. There, she found records detailing the cult's activities and their ultimate downfall. According to the documents, the cult had attempted to summon a powerful entity, but something had gone terribly wrong. The ritual had unleashed a vengeful spirit that had wiped out the cult members. Connecting the dots, Laura realized that Jane Doe had likely been a modern-day member of the cult, attempting to revive its dark practices. Her death had not been a simple accident, but the result of a ritual gone awry, and whatever had been summoned now roamed free. Mike Taylor tried to move on with his life, but the events of that night haunted him. He couldn't escape the nightmares or the feeling of being watched. Despite his best efforts to forget, the whispers followed him, growing louder with each passing day. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, the whispers intensified. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Desperate for relief, Mike turned on every light in the house, but the oppressive darkness seemed to press in on him, suffocating him. In a moment of clarity, he realized that the only way to end this torment was to confront it. Gathering his courage, he returned to St. Andrew's Hospital. The building was dark and deserted, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within him. He made his way to the sealed-off autopsy room, his heart pounding with fear and determination. He pried open the door, stepping into the cold, silent room. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the faint whispers began again, growing louder as he moved closer to the table where Jane Doe had been. "Why have you come back?" a voice hissed, sending shivers down his spine. "I need to end this," Mike replied, his voice shaking. "What do you want?" The room grew colder, and the ghostly figure of Jane Doe materialized before him, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You disturbed the ritual. You must complete it to set me free." Mike felt a surge of dread. He had no knowledge of rituals or the occult, but he knew he had no choice. Following the whisper's guidance, he gathered the necessary items from the hospital's storage rooms: candles, chalk, and various herbs. He returned to the autopsy room and began to draw the symbols he had seen in Laura's photos, praying he was doing it correctly. As he lit the candles and placed them around the room, the whispers intensified, guiding him through the steps. The temperature dropped further, and the lights flickered ominously. Mike could feel the presence growing stronger, pressing down on him with an almost tangible force. "Complete the circle," the voice commanded. With trembling hands, Mike finished the last symbol and stepped back, watching as the candle's flames flickered violently. The room filled with a low, ominous chant, echoing off the walls and reverberating through his bones. The ghostly figure of Jane Doe floated above the autopsy table, her eyes fixed on Mike. "You have done well. Now, the final step." "What is it?" Mike asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Blood. Your blood," she replied, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You must give a part of yourself to close the circle and end this." Mike hesitated, fear gripping his heart, but he knew he had no other choice. Taking a scalpel from the nearby table, he made a shallow cut on his palm, letting the blood drip onto the center of the circle. The symbols began to glow, pulsing with an eerie light. As the last drop of blood fell, a blinding flash of light filled the room, and a powerful gust of wind extinguished the candles. The whispers ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. When Mike opened his eyes, the ghostly figure was gone, and the room felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Exhausted and trembling, Mike collapsed to the floor, relief washing over him. He had done it. He had ended the nightmare. Days passed, and the oppressive presence that had haunted Mike was gone. He felt a sense of peace for the first time in months. He returned to his routine, trying to rebuild his life and put the past behind him. However, the memory of that night lingered, a dark shadow in the recesses of his mind. Detective Laura Henderson continued her investigation, determined to ensure that the cult's dark practices were fully eradicated. She uncovered more about the rituals and the history of the Children of the Black Sun, piecing together the puzzle of Jane Doe's death and the events that followed. Her findings revealed that the cult had splintered into several small groups, each trying to resurrect the old ways. Jane Doe had been one of many, part of a dangerous network that spanned the country. Laura knew that the battle was far from over, but with Mike's help, they had taken a crucial step in stopping the spread of darkness. Mike and Laura formed an unlikely partnership, united by their shared experiences and determination to prevent further tragedies. They worked together, following leads and uncovering more about the cult activities. Their bond grew stronger, forged in the crucible of fear and resolve. Months turned into years, and Mike and Laura made significant progress in their fight against the remnants of the cult. They dismantled several cells and brought many members to justice. However, the core of the cult, the true heart of the darkness, remained elusive. One night, Laura received a tip about a gathering in an old mansion on the outskirts of town. It was said to be a major ritual, one that could unleash untold horrors if completed. She and Mike knew they had to act fast. They arrived at the mansion, the air thick with tension. The building loomed ominously in the darkness, its windows like empty eyes staring into the void. They moved quietly, their flashlights cutting through the gloom as they made their way inside. The interior was a twisted maze of decaying rooms and winding corridors. Strange symbols adorned the walls, and the air was filled with the faint scent of incense. They followed the sound of chanting, growing louder with each step. Finally, they reached a large candlelit chamber. Hooded figures stood in a circle, chanting in a language neither Mike nor Laura understood. At the center of the circle was an altar, and on it lay a young woman, bound and unconscious. Mike and Laura exchanged a glance, nodding in silent agreement. They burst into the room, guns drawn, shouting for the cultists to freeze. The chanting stopped, and the figures turned towards them, their eyes gleaming with malice. A fierce struggle ensued. Mike and Laura fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Just when it seemed they were about to be overwhelmed, the young woman on the altar awoke. With a strength born of desperation, she broke free of her bonds and joined the fight. Together, they managed to overpower the cultists. The leader, a man with piercing eyes and an aura of pure malevolence, sneered at them as he was subdued. "You think you've won?" he spat. "The darkness cannot be stopped. It will rise again." Mike and Laura ignored his threats, focusing on securing the scene and ensuring the young woman's safety. As they left the mansion, the first light of dawn breaking through the storm clouds, they felt a sense of accomplishment and hope. They had struck a significant blow against the darkness, but they knew their work was far from over. With the cult leader behind bars and the young woman safe, Mike and Laura continued their mission, more determined than ever. They knew the fight against darkness was a never-ending battle, but they were prepared to face whatever came their way. Mike found a renewed sense of purpose in his work, no longer haunted by the whispers of the past. He and Laura grew closer, their bond deepening into something more profound. Together, they faced the unknown, united in their quest to protect the innocent and prevent the rise of evil. As the years went by, they trained others to join their cause, building a network of dedicated individuals committed to stopping the spread of dark rituals and protecting those who could not protect themselves. The legacy of the Children of the Black Sun faded into obscurity, their influence diminished by the relentless efforts of Mike, Laura, and their allies. The autopsy room at St. Andrew's Hospital remained sealed, a silent reminder of the horrors that had once transpired within its walls. But for Mike and Laura, it was not a place of fear. It was a testament to their resilience, a symbol of their victory over the darkness. And as they stood together, watching the sun rise on a new day, they knew that as long as they had each other, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think happened to Dr. Mike and Detective Laura after they stopped the cult? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, stay safe out there. You never know what's lurking in the shadows. When things hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck, living situation-wise, and could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites and found something that caught my eye. A man named Luke had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent was $1,500 a month, and he'd basically be my landlord and roommate since he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note in the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time, and that the renter would often have the place to themselves. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Luke. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house and I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size, and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. He laid out some more ground rules in person and emphasized again how I couldn't go in the attic or the basement as he used them for storage only. That sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I was interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later, I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month on the first day of every month. I settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture at first. Luke never told me what he did for work. He just said he usually wouldn't be home. But I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night, I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom and noticed the basement door was open. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the bang stopped, and Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said I was just going to the bathroom. He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, my mind racing, wondering what he was doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through. I could tell the closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key and likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room, relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Luke's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom and then said he was in a hurry and had to go. He left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time, I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Luke wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky, I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement. At least the main room there was. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there. And the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately, it was locked. Or maybe I should say fortunately. Because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there emitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement and found nothing. Just some taped up cardboard boxes which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night I stayed in my room. I never heard Luke come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up and the room was still dark. My alarm was not going off. Something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed creak, and I turned and saw Luke leaning over my bed looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed no and asked how he got in here. I locked the door. He then asked me, "Are you sure?" I flipped the cards on him and yelled, "Did you come into this room when I wasn't home?" He replied no, then turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, "How did you get in here then?" I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything at the time. I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, "I think you should find other living arrangements." And then he closed the door. I started packing right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later, he opened the door and just his arm stuck out from the door holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it. It was only $400, but whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back at my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous situation I just went through, something changed. They were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. It was my junior year of college. I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was sort of assigned to me by the school in the sense that he was just someone else who needed someone to live with. His name was David, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly and polite, always smiling and making small talk. But as the days went by, I started to notice strange things about him, little quirks and odd behaviors that made me feel uneasy. It started with the way David would always linger in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings as if he were way too comfortable doing so. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, even if I found it kind of weird. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Then there were the sounds I would hear coming from David's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just David on his phone or watching TV. But the sounds continued and got stranger and stranger. I eventually asked David about the noise, trying to keep my tone light and non-confrontational. David just laughed and said he had trouble sleeping and liked to listen to podcasts to help him relax. But the noise never sounded like a podcast. It was too sporadic and disjointed, and there were too many voices. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone talking loudly in the living room. I got out of bed and cautiously walked to the living room. I was surprised to find David sitting on the couch, surrounded by open cardboard boxes filled with old photos and memorabilia. He looked up at me with a strange, almost manic gleam in his eyes. He said he was going through some old stuff from his childhood and got carried away. I nodded and backed away, returning to my room and locking the door behind me. A few days later, I came home from class to find David standing in the kitchen, holding one of my kitchen knives. He was staring at it intently, turning it over in his hands as if he had never seen a knife before. I asked him what he was doing, and he looked up at me with a blank expression. He said he was just curious about the knife and wanted to see how sharp it was. He then put the knife back in the block and walked away as if nothing had happened. I started to feel like I was living with a ticking time bomb, never knowing when David might do something truly dangerous. I considered talking to the apartment manager or even the police, but I didn't have any concrete evidence that David was a threat. It was just a feeling, a nagging sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed and opened the door to find David standing there, his face twisted in anger. He accused me of going through his things and stealing his stuff. I was taken aback and tried to calm him down, explaining that I had never touched his belongings. But David wouldn't listen. He was convinced that I was lying, and he started to push past me into my room. I stood my ground and told him to leave, my voice shaking with fear. After what felt like an eternity, David finally backed down and stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. The next day, I went to the apartment manager and told her everything. She listened sympathetically and said she would talk to David and see if there was anything she could do. But I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I started looking for a new place to live, and within a week I had found a new apartment and moved out. I never saw David again, and I never found out what his deal was. But the experience left me shaken and wary of living with strangers ever again. It was a harsh lesson in the dangers of trusting people too easily, and the importance of following your instincts when something feels wrong.
Haunted cupboard. There was something off about the cupboard in our dining room. It was an old oak piece of furniture that had been in our family for generations. The dark wood, ornate carvings, and brass handles gave it an almost regal appearance, but it was its history that sent shivers down my spine. My grandmother used to tell us that the cupboard had belonged to a distant relative who dabbled in the occult. It sounded like a story meant to keep us in line as kids, but recent events have made me question everything. It all started when my parents decided to renovate the house. They wanted to create more space in the dining room, and the cupboard, with its age and size, was the first item on the list to go. My father and I struggled to move it, the wood creaking ominously, as if it resisted our efforts. Finally, we managed to slide it into the garage, where it stood, casting long, eerie shadows in the dim light. That night, I had a nightmare. I was in the dining room, alone, and the cupboard was back in its place. Its doors slowly creaked open, revealing darkness inside. As I approached, a cold, skeletal hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. I woke up screaming, my heart pounding. It was just a dream, I told myself, just a dream. The next morning, I found the cupboard doors open. I asked my parents if they had moved it back, but they denied it, saying they had been in bed all night. The tension in our house grew as strange occurrences became more frequent. Objects went missing, only to reappear in bizarre places. The temperature in the dining room would drop suddenly, and we all felt a presence watching us. One evening, as I was watching TV alone, I heard a faint scratching noise coming from the garage. My first thought was that it was a mouse, but the sound grew louder and more insistent. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the garage. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the cupboard. The scratching noise stopped as soon as I entered the room. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, waiting for something, anything to happen. Suddenly, the cupboard doors burst open, slamming against the sides with a force that shook the walls. A gust of icy wind rushed out, nearly knocking me off my feet. I stumbled back, tripping over a toolbox and landing hard on the concrete floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran back into the house, slamming the garage door behind me. My parents, alarmed by the noise, came running. I tried to explain what had happened, but they looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. My father decided to check the garage himself. He returned a few minutes later, pale and shaken, confirming that the cupboard doors were indeed open, but he insisted there must be a rational explanation. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I began researching the history of the cupboard. I discovered that it had originally belonged to a woman named Elizabeth Thornton, a distant relative who lived in the early 1900s. Elizabeth was rumored to have been involved in dark rituals and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her house burned down, and the cupboard was one of the few items salvaged from the wreckage. I also found an old journal belonging to my grandmother. In it, she described strange occurrences linked to the cupboard and mentioned that Elizabeth had used it to store items related to her rituals. The final entry was a warning. Do not disturb the cupboard. It is a gateway to something beyond our understanding. Despite the warnings, I was determined to end the haunting once and for all. I enlisted the help of my friend Mark, who had a keen interest in the paranormal. We set up cameras and audio recorders around the cupboard, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. That night, we sat in the darkened garage, waiting. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional creak of the house settling. Just as we were about to call it a night, the temperature dropped dramatically. Our breath became visible in the cold air. The cupboard doors began to rattle, then slowly creaked open. Mark and I exchanged nervous glances, but held our ground. From the darkness of the cupboard, a low, guttural growl emanated. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, primal and filled with malice. A shadowy figure began to emerge, its form twisting and contorting as if struggling to break free. Mark and I were frozen with fear, unable to move. Suddenly, the figure lunged at us. Mark screamed and bolted for the door, but I stood my ground, driven by a mix of terror and determination. I shouted at the entity, demanding it reveal itself. The shadow paused, its form shifting, then retreated back into the cupboard, the doors slamming shut with a deafening bang. The next morning, we reviewed the footage. The cameras had captured everything: the growl, the shadowy figure, and even my confrontation with the entity. Mark was visibly shaken and refused to discuss the incident further, but I was more determined than ever to put an end to the haunting. I returned to my grandmother's journal, searching for any clue on how to banish the entity. The final pages contained a ritual meant to seal the gateway. It required specific items: candles, salt, and a chant in a language I didn't recognize. I gathered everything I needed and waited for nightfall. As darkness fell, I set up the candles in a circle around the cupboard, sprinkling salt at the base. I began the chant, stumbling over the unfamiliar words. The air grew heavy, and a low hum filled the room. The cupboard doors began to rattle violently, but I continued the chant, my voice growing stronger with each repetition. The doors burst open, and the shadowy figure reappeared, writhing and thrashing. I stepped forward, continuing the chant, forcing the entity back. With a final, desperate cry, the shadow dissolved into the darkness, and the cupboard doors slammed shut one last time. The atmosphere in the house lightened immediately. The strange occurrences stopped, and the feeling of being watched vanished. My parents were relieved, though they never fully believed my story. The cupboard remained in the garage, untouched and undisturbed. A week later, we decided to sell the cupboard to an antique dealer. As the dealer loaded it into his truck, he remarked on its craftsmanship and asked about its history. I simply told him it was a family heirloom with too many bad memories attached. As the truck drove away, I felt a sense of closure. The haunting was over and the entity was gone. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear a faint scratching sound and wonder if the cupboard truly took its secrets with it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Sweet dreams, if you can. The Haunted Hotel Room, 222. The rain pounded against the windshield of my car, each droplet a resounding tap against the glass, echoing in the silence of the deserted road. The GPS had led me astray again, or so I thought, as I squinted at the map on my phone, trying to find my way back to the main highway. It was late, far too late to be driving in the middle of nowhere. The moon was hidden behind a shroud of storm clouds, and the only light came from the occasional flash of lightning, illuminating the dark landscape in brief, eerie bursts. After what felt like an eternity of driving through the night, I finally saw a flicker of light in the distance. As I approached, the faint outline of a building emerged from the darkness. A neon sign buzzed and flickered, the Wayfarer Inn. Relieved to have found some semblance of civilization, I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the tires crunching loudly as I came to a stop. The inn looked like something out of an old horror movie. It was a two-story structure with peeling paint and sagging eaves, but the light in the windows offered a promise of warmth and shelter. I grabbed my suitcase and dashed through the rain to the entrance, the cold droplets soaking through my clothes. Inside, the inn was surprisingly well kept, though it had an unmistakably vintage feel. The reception desk was manned by an elderly woman with a kind smile, her white hair pulled back into a neat bun. "Good evening," she greeted me. "Looking for a room for the night?" "Yes, please," I replied, trying to shake off the chill from the rain. "Just one night." She nodded and handed me a brass key attached to a worn leather fob. "Room 222, she said, her smile faltering slightly. "Enjoy your stay." I took the key and headed up the creaky wooden staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, the wallpaper a faded floral pattern that must have been fashionable decades ago. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I reached room 222 and unlocked the door, stepping into the room with a sigh of relief. The room was small but cozy, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a dresser. A large window overlooked the parking lot, and I could hear the rain pattering against the glass. I set my suitcase down and flopped onto the bed, exhausted. As I lay there, my mind wandered, and I found myself thinking about the old woman at the front desk. There had been something strange about her, something unsettling in the way her smile had faded when she mentioned the room number. Shrugging off my unease, I got up to take a shower, hoping to wash away the stress of the day. The bathroom was clean but old-fashioned, with a clawfoot tub and a rusty mirror. As I stood under the hot spray, I felt the tension in my muscles begin to melt away. After my shower, I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and crisp, and despite the storm raging outside, I felt a sense of calm. I closed my eyes and let myself drift off to sleep. It must have been hours later when I awoke with a start. The room was pitch black, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then, the events of the evening came rushing back. I lay still, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. But there was something else. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whispering. I sat up, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to be coming from the corner of the room, near the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it on. The room was empty, just as it had been when I went to bed. The whispers stopped the moment the light came on. "Just my imagination," I muttered, trying to reassure myself. I turned the light off and lay back down, but sleep was elusive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Hours seemed to crawl by, each minute dragging into the next. At some point, I must have dozed off again, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was still dark outside, but the rain had stopped. I checked the time, 3:33 a.m. Groggy and disoriented, I answered the call without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" I croaked. "Get out of the room." The voice on the other end was distorted, as if it were being transmitted through a broken speaker. "Get out now, before it's too late." I sat up, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Who is this?" "Leave room 222. You have to leave." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart racing. Who had called me? And how did they know I was in room 222? Panic set in, and I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. I grabbed my suitcase and threw my clothes inside haphazardly. As I was about to leave, the whispers started again, louder this time, insistent. The temperature in the room plummeted, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled and twisted, but it was as if the door was locked from the outside. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and I could feel a presence closing in around me. Desperate, I ran to the window and tried to open it, but it was stuck. I pounded on the glass, hoping to break it, but it wouldn't give. The whispers were now a chorus of voices, overlapping and echoing, filling my mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, the room went silent. The whispers stopped, and the temperature returned to normal. I stood there panting, my hands trembling. The door to the room slowly creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. I didn't wait to see what was happening. I grabbed my suitcase and bolted out of the room, not looking back. As I ran down the hallway, I heard the whispers again, fainter now, as if they were coming from a great distance. I reached the stairs and practically flew down them, bursting into the lobby, where the elderly woman was still at the desk. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. I need to leave," I stammered. "Something's wrong with that room." She sighed and shook her head. "I'm so sorry, dear. I hoped it wouldn't come to this." "What do you mean?" I demanded. "Room 2022. It's haunted," she admitted. "We've had other guests report strange occurrences, but nothing this severe. We usually close it off, but with the storm, we had no other rooms available." I stared at her in disbelief. "Haunted? By what?" She looked down, her expression sad. "There was an incident many years ago. A guest died in that room under mysterious circumstances. Since then, strange things have happened to anyone who stays there." "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked, anger and fear bubbling up inside me. "I didn't think it would be this bad," she said quietly. "I'm truly sorry. Here, let me refund your stay and find you another place to spend the night." I accepted her offer, though it did little to calm my nerves. As I left the inn and drove away, the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the inn growing smaller in the distance. A shiver ran down my spine as I recalled the whispers and the cold presence in the room. Weeks passed, and I tried to put the experience behind me, but every night I found myself waking up at 3:33 a.m., the memory of the whispers still fresh in my mind. I did some research and found stories of other people who had stayed in room 222, each with their own terrifying tale. Some claimed to have seen apparitions. Others spoke of hearing voices. but all had one thing in common. They left the room with a deep, lingering fear. I contacted a paranormal investigator, hoping to get some answers. We met at a coffee shop and I recounted my experience. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Room 222 is known among those of us in the field," he said. "It's a hotspot for paranormal activity. The incident the innkeeper mentioned was just the beginning. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of strange occurrences, all linked to that room." "What can I do?" I asked. "I can't keep waking up like this." He thought for a moment. "Sometimes, acknowledging the presence can help. Spirits often seek recognition or closure. If you can, go back to the inn and confront whatever is in that room. It might give you the peace you need." The thought of returning to the Wayfarer Inn filled me with dread, but I knew he was right. I couldn't live in fear forever. A few days later, I made the journey back, arriving at the inn just as the sun was setting. The elderly woman at the desk looked surprised to see me. "You're back," she said. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I nodded. "I need to." She handed me the key to room 222, her hand trembling. "Good luck," she whispered. I made my way up the stairs, the familiar creaks and groans of the old wood sending chills down my spine. I reached the door to room 222 and took a deep breath before unlocking it and stepping inside. The room looked just as it had before, but there was an oppressive atmosphere, as if the very air was charged with energy. I set my suitcase down and took a seat on the bed, waiting. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. But then, just as the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the temperature plummeted and the whispers began anew. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" I called out. "What do you want?" The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but I couldn't make out any words. I closed my eyes, trying to focus. "Please," I said. "If you need something, tell me." There was a sudden silence, and then a single word, clear and distinct. "Help." I opened my eyes, and there in the corner of the room stood a figure. It was a man, his form translucent and shimmering. His eyes were filled with a deep sadness. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He pointed to the window, and I saw it now, a faint outline of a noose hanging from the ceiling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This man had taken his own life in this room, and his spirit had been trapped here ever since. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "How can I help you?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Forgive." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. "I forgive you," I said. "I forgive you for whatever happened. Please find peace." The man's form flickered, and then, with a soft sigh, he vanished. The temperature in the room returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I knew then that he had found the closure he needed. I left the Wayfarer Inn that morning, feeling a sense of relief. The nightmares stopped, and I no longer woke up at 3:33 a.m., but I never forgot the man in room 222, or the lesson I learned about the lingering power of unresolved grief. If you ever find yourself at the Wayfarer Inn, remember this story. Room 222 may seem like just another room, but it holds the echoes of a tragic past, and if you listen closely, you might hear the whispers of a spirit seeking peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Sweet dreams, and beware of the shadows. Lost Echoes. The highway stretched endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren landscape like a scar. It was on this desolate stretch of road that Ethan's life changed forever. He and his younger sister, Lily, were on their way to visit their grandparents when tragedy struck. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the horizon, when a sudden gust of wind sent their car careening off the road. The world spun in a blur of metal and glass, and when Ethan regained consciousness, Lily was gone. Frantic and disoriented, Ethan stumbled out of the wrecked car, calling out for his sister. But the only response was the eerie silence of the deserted highway. Panic gripped his heart as he realized the gravity of the situation. He had lost Lily in the middle of nowhere. With trembling hands, Ethan reached for his phone, but there was no signal. The realization that they were truly alone in this vast emptiness sent a shiver down his spine. Determined to find Lily, Ethan set off on foot, his mind racing with fear and desperation. As night descended, the highway transformed into a sinister realm. Shadows danced along the edges of Ethan's vision. Whispers echoed through the stillness, and the distant howl of a lone wolf sent chills down his spine. Every step felt like a descent into madness as he searched tirelessly for any sign of his sister. Hours turned into days, and Ethan's hope began to wane. He stumbled upon abandoned cars, relics of past accidents, their shattered windows reflecting the moonlight like haunted eyes. But there was no trace of Lily. Just when Ethan was on the brink of giving up, he heard it, the faint sound of a child's laughter. Heart pounding, he followed the sound, his legs carrying him deeper into the darkness. The laughter led him to an old, decrepit motel, its neon sign flickering like a dying ember. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of decay and neglect. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper and faded photographs, each telling a story of forgotten dreams and lost souls. But Ethan's focus was singular. He had to find Lily. The laughter grew louder, guiding him down a hallway lined with closed doors. With trembling hands, Ethan pushed open the last door, and there she was. Lily sitting on the edge of a dusty bed, her eyes wide with innocence and fear. "Ethan," she cried, running into his arms. "I knew you'd find me." Relief flooded through Ethan as he held his sister close, his eyes brimming with tears of joy. But his happiness was short-lived as he noticed something unsettling. Lily's laughter had ceased, replaced by a haunting silence. Before he could react, the room transformed. The walls warped and twisted, shadows contorted into monstrous shapes, and a chill settled in the air that froze Ethan's blood. He tried to move, to scream, but he was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The horror acts unfolded before his eyes, phantoms of the past tormenting him, whispers of lost souls beckoning him into the abyss. Lily's form shifted, her innocent face contorting into a grotesque mask of terror, her voice a haunting echo in his mind. "Why couldn't you save me, Ethan? Why did you let me go?" Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he realized the truth. The motel was a prison, a purgatory for lost souls, and he was trapped in its grip. The sadness of his failure, the agony of his paralysis, and the horror of his surroundings merged into a cacophony of despair. But in that darkness, a glimmer of clarity emerged. Ethan understood that his love for Lily, his unwavering determination to find her, was his salvation. With every ounce of strength left in him, he fought against the paralysis, reaching out to his sister. And in that moment of connection, the darkness shattered, the horror dissipated, and Ethan found himself lying on the deserted highway, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. Lily was beside him, her hand in his, a smile of understanding on her face. "We made it," she whispered, her voice filled with love and forgiveness. But as Ethan tried to sit up, he realized the cruel twist of fate. He was paralyzed from the neck down. The horror had taken its toll, leaving him trapped in a body that no longer obeyed his commands. As tears welled up in his eyes, Ethan looked at Lily, his heart heavy with sorrow and gratitude. She was safe. They were together, but their journey had come at a cost too great to bear. The highway stretched before them, a symbol of endless possibilities and unspoken fears. And in that bittersweet moment, Ethan and Lily understood that sometimes the greatest horrors are not the ones we face in the darkness, but the ones that linger in the echoes of our own hearts. As Ethan and Lily's harrowing ordeal came to an end, the echoes of their journey lingered in the haunted highways of their minds. The horrors they faced, the love that bound them, and the sacrifices they made were etched into their souls forever. Join us next time for more spine-chilling tales and heart-wrenching encounters. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to dive deeper into the realms of fear and courage. Until then, beware of the darkness that lurks within and without, for in the world of horror, every ending is a new beginning. Thank you for watching, and may your nightmares be filled with echoes of hope and resilience. Good night, if you dare to close your eyes. In the heart of the small, unassuming town of Millbrook, a peculiar legend had persisted for generations. It was the tale of the cursed chair, a seemingly innocuous piece of furniture that was said to bring misfortune and death to those who dared to sit upon it. This chilling narrative had been passed down through hushed whispers and ghostly campfire stories, but few believed it to be anything more than a local myth. That all changed when a young couple, Emma and David, moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town. The house had been vacant for years, its previous owners having mysteriously vanished. Despite the eerie rumors, the couple was captivated by the house's charm and history. They decided to restore it to its former glory, unaware of the dark secret it held. One sunny afternoon, while clearing out the dusty attic, Emma stumbled upon a peculiar chair tucked away in a dark corner. It was an antique rocking chair, intricately carved with strange symbols and a peculiar, unsettling aura about it. She called David over to take a look. "David, look at this. It's beautiful, but there's something odd about it," Emma remarked, brushing off the thick layer of dust. David examined the chair, admiring its craftsmanship. "It's definitely unique. Maybe it's worth something." Despite the odd feeling it gave her, Emma decided to keep the chair, placing it in their newly renovated living room as a centerpiece. That evening, they invited their friends over for a housewarming party. Laughter filled the room, and everyone marveled at the house's transformation. Inevitably, someone noticed the chair. "Wow, this is a gorgeous piece," their friend Sarah exclaimed. "Where did you find it?" Emma shared the story of discovering it in the attic, and everyone was intrigued. As the night went on, the chair became the topic of conversation. Encouraged by the drinks and the spooky atmosphere, Sarah dared to sit in it. "Oh, come on, it's just a chair," she said, plopping down into the seat. The room fell silent for a moment, and then everyone laughed nervously. Nothing happened, and the party continued. The next morning, Emma received a frantic call from Sarah's husband. Sarah hadn't come home that night. Panic set in, and they searched everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's disappearance became a mystery, just like the house's former residents. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the chair had something to do with it. She began to research its origins, diving into old town records and local folklore. What she found chilled her to the bone. The chair was rumored to have been crafted by a notorious witch, Eliza Blackwood, who had been executed centuries ago. It was said that she had imbued the chair with a curse as a final act of vengeance, ensuring that anyone who sat in it would meet a terrible fate. Desperate to understand more, Emma visited the town's historian, Mr. Peterson. The old man's eyes widened when she mentioned the chair. "You must get rid of it," he warned. "The curse is real. Every family that's owned that chair has suffered unimaginable losses." Emma's heart raced as she recalled the strange occurrences that had been happening since they found the chair. Unexplained noises at night, shadows that seemed to move on their own, and a growing sense of dread that permeated the house. Determined to break the curse, Emma and David decided to burn the chair. They dragged it to the backyard and set it ablaze. As the flames consumed the wood, they felt a momentary relief, believing they had rid themselves of the curse. That night, Emma had a nightmare. She dreamt of the witch, Eliza, standing in the flames, her eyes burning with hatred. "You cannot destroy what is already damned," she hissed. Emma woke up in a cold sweat, the eerie feeling lingering. The next day, David was involved in a horrific car accident. He survived, but was left in a coma. Emma was devastated, her belief in the curse now unshakable. Haunted and desperate, Emma returned to Mr. Peterson, pleading for help. The old man revealed that the only way to lift the curse was to return the chair to its rightful place, the site of Eliza Blackwood's execution, a now abandoned plot of land on the outskirts of town. With David's life hanging by a thread, Emma knew she had no choice. She retrieved the charred remains of the chair and set off for the execution site. The land was desolate, overgrown with weeds, and filled with an oppressive silence. As she approached the spot, a chill ran down her spine. With a sense of foreboding, Emma placed the remains of the chair on the ground. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and a figure materialized before her. It was Eliza, her ghostly form radiating malevolence. "You think you can end this?" Eliza's voice echoed, filled with rage. Emma stood her ground, her voice trembling. "Please, let this end. I beg you." Eliza's eyes bore into hers. "The curse was never about the chair. It was about the suffering of those who wronged me. But you showed compassion. For that, I will release you." In an instant, Eliza vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Emma felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She hurried back to the hospital, where she found David awake, weak but alive. The curse had been lifted. The couple decided to leave Millbrook, unable to bear the memories of their ordeal. They moved to a new town, hoping for a fresh start. But the legend of the cursed chair lived on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Thanks for watching this episode of True Terror Files. If you enjoyed this story about the cursed chair, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. James and Lisa Morgan were a young couple, always on the lookout for unique treasures to fill their quaint old house in the suburbs. One sunny Saturday morning, they decided to visit a flea market on the outskirts of town, known for its eclectic array of antiques and curiosities. As they wandered through the maze of stalls, something caught Lisa's eye. A large, ornate mirror with an intricately carved wooden frame. The vendor, an elderly man with a cryptic smile, noticed their interest and shuffled over. "This mirror has a long history," he said, his voice raspy. "Some say it's enchanted." Intrigued by the mirror's craftsmanship and the vendor's mysterious words, James and Lisa decided to buy it. They negotiated a fair price and loaded the heavy mirror into their car, unaware of the dark history they were bringing into their home. Once the mirror was hung on the living room wall, it added a touch of elegance to their decor. For the first few days, everything seemed normal, but soon they began to notice strange occurrences. It started with subtle oddities. Lisa was the first to sense it, an eerie feeling that something was off. She would catch glimpses of shadows moving in the mirror that didn't correspond to anything in the room. James dismissed her concerns, attributing them to reflections from outside or tricks of the light. One night, as Lisa was reading a book on the couch, she glanced at the mirror and froze. Reflected in the glass was a figure standing in the hallway, a tall man with hollow eyes and a menacing grin. She spun around, her heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. "James," she called out, her voice trembling. He rushed into the room, concern etched on his face. "There was someone in the mirror," she stammered. "I swear I saw him." James tried to reassure her, but the unease in his gut told him otherwise. That night, sleep eluded them both. The next morning, they decided to cover the mirror with a sheet, hoping to rid themselves of the unsettling presence. However, the strange occurrences only intensified. The sheet would be mysteriously removed, and they would find the mirror uncovered, reflecting their anxious faces back at them. Objects in the house began to move on their own. A chair dragged itself across the floor, doors creaked open and shut, and lights flickered ominously. One evening, while James was working late at the office, Lisa found herself alone in the house. The atmosphere felt heavy and oppressive. She tried to distract herself with TV, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Gathering her courage, she approached the mirror, determined to confront whatever was haunting them. As she stood before it, her reflection seemed to warp and twist. The room behind her darkened, and she saw not her own reflection, but that of a ghostly woman with sunken eyes and a mournful expression. The woman's lips moved, forming words that Lisa couldn't hear, but she could feel the anguish emanating from her. In a flash, the woman's image was replaced by the grinning man, his eyes locking onto Lisa's with malevolent glee. He reached out a ghostly hand, and Lisa felt an icy grip around her throat. Gasping for breath, she stumbled back, breaking the connection. When James returned home, he found Lisa huddled on the couch, tears streaming down her face. She recounted the horrifying experience, and James knew they had to do something. They decided to research the mirror's origins, hoping to find a way to break its hold over them. Their search led them to a local historian, Mrs. Hawthorne, who specialized in occult artifacts. She listened intently to their story, her expression growing graver by the minute. "This mirror is known as the cursed looking glass," she explained. "It belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century. The legend says that the patriarch, a man named Gideon Blackwood, dabbled in dark magic. He trapped the souls of his enemies in the mirror, using it as a tool for revenge. After his death, the mirror changed hands many times, always bringing misfortune and death to its owners. Mrs. Hawthorne advised them to destroy the mirror, but warned that it wouldn't be easy. "The spirits within will not go quietly," she said. "You must break the mirror at the stroke of midnight when its power is weakest." That night, armed with sledgehammers, James and Lisa prepared to confront the malevolent forces within the mirror. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the house seemed to come alive with a sinister energy. Shadows writhed on the walls, and the air grew frigid. At the stroke of midnight, they struck the mirror. It shattered with a deafening crash, fragments flying everywhere. For a moment, it felt like a victory, but then an otherworldly wail filled the room, and the shattered pieces began to swirl and reassemble. Panicked, James and Lisa continued to strike the reforming mirror, desperate to end the nightmare. Finally, with a final, resounding blow, the mirror exploded into 1,000 pieces, the wail dying away into silence. Exhausted and trembling, they sank to the floor, surrounded by shards of glass. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and for the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of peace. Over the next few days, they carefully cleaned up the remains of the mirror and disposed of them, hoping to put the ordeal behind them. Life slowly returned to normal, but they remained wary, their experience a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk within seemingly innocent objects. Months later, at another flea market, they stumbled upon a small, unassuming trinket box. As they examined it, the vendor, an elderly woman with a knowing smile, watched them closely. "That box has a long history," she said cryptically. James and Lisa exchanged a glance, a shiver running down their spines. With a polite smile, they set the box back down and walked away, vowing to be more cautious about the treasures they brought into their home. The memory of the haunted mirror served as a chilling reminder that some things are best left untouched. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey through the haunting of the antique mirror. Until we meet again, may your path be illuminated by the light of courage and truth.